Welcome back. We're going to continue with the Industrial Revolution. Think about the impact this has in agriculture. New scientific techniques, insecticides to increase agricultural production. Fertilizers are going to have a huge impact. Scientists are going to experiment with hybrid plants to try to create stronger strains of various grains. Let's take this a step further and look at the Industrial Revolution and its impact at the intersection of politics, rising business class, and the old traditional landed gentry who have traditionally held the wealth. And we're going to talk about England here, that had held the wealth in England. They're landowners. They produced the grain. The serfs or the peasants had lived on their lands. They have great political power. Long-standing families, the aristocrats or the peers in England. So what I want to talk about just for a moment here are the corn laws or grain laws in England. These laws are passed by Parliament to prevent the importation of cheaper grains into England from Europe. This, of course, is to protect domestic farming. If we allow cheaper grains to come in from France, then that's going to hurt English farms, right? So the idea here is to protect domestic agriculture. Now, these corn laws keep English grain prices high. Keep that in mind. Now, in the cities, you have a new rising class, what Marx would call the bourgeoisie, this rising middle class of factory managers and owners. They have different interests than the old traditional landed gentry that had been in existence for centuries. These factory owners want lower grain prices so that bread is cheaper. If we can bring this about, then we can actually pay our workers less. It won't require as high wages to sustain them if we can get grain prices to go down. Of course, the landed gentry want grain prices to remain high for their personal profit and the enrichment of their farms. So you have a conflict here. The old traditional landed gentry on the one hand wants to keep the prices high for grain. New rising bourgeoisie that want to keep prices low for their factory workers so we don't have to pay them as much. This turns into a political battle. Parliament abolishes the corn laws in 1846. You can see here the power is now shifting from the traditional source of authority in the countryside with the landed gentry to a new, rising, powerful, wealthy business class. Let's cross the channel and talk about France here for a moment. France was lagged behind England. And there are a few reasons. Let me give them to you. One, France, of course, was its production, its advancement in industrialization was hindered because of the wars of the French Revolution and then the Napoleonic Wars. This is very disruptive to the French economy. Of course, war helps a few industries, but for the most part, it hinders economic development. And of course, you have the long-term British blockade of France during the French Revolution and the wars of Napoleon. This also inhibits the development of the French economy. And there's another factor here. If you think of France, if you think of French products in particular, we tend to think of handcrafted luxury items as opposed to mass-produced items. Things like champagne, cognac, French furs, French fashion, gourmet food, fine wines, jewelry. Think about the difference between shopping in France and shopping in the United States. Here, an American can go to Walmart, get his tires changed, get a manicure, buy groceries, and get his eyes checked. In France, the French consumer is likely to go to a variety of specialty shops to purchase bread here, fruits and vegetables here, meat from a butcher here, flowers from a florist here, wine at a specialty shop. So that a Frenchman, by the time he gets home, may have a half a dozen bags in his hand from different places, all specializing in something in particular. The American consumer is much more concerned with price and convenience. So they can go to a place like Walmart and try to do all these things under one roof. Of course, you're not going to get the quality at Walmart, but it is cheaper and it is perhaps more convenient. Germany. Let's make a few comments about Germany here in this Industrial Revolution. Of course, the Holy Roman Empire remains as fragmented as we talked about in the wars of religion. So there's political disunity. This hinders industrial growth. These various little Germanic kingdoms and principalities have local customs. They have local weights and measures, and this inhibits trade. The Zollverein, the economic union, is formed in 1834. It tries to speed up shipping and commerce. The Zollverein sort of fuels the desire among Germans maybe for political unity as they strive even here in the 19th century for economic unity. And of course Bismarck will unite the Germans under Prussian leadership in 1871. This is a topic we'll discuss in our next lecture when we talk about nationalism and the rise of Germany and Italy. By 1900, this new German empire is either passing or catching up with England in all sorts of industrial capacities, and is going to become the chief economic engine of Europe. And then, of course, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany is going to launch an ambitious naval program that looks to be challenging England's traditional superiority on the seas. This, of course, will be one of those factors that will lead us into the Great War, which we'll talk about in detail. A couple of words here on the transportation revolution, a part of this bigger industrial revolution. Railroads, again, moving people and goods, raw materials, finished products, moving them quickly and cheaply, safely from one place to the other. Canals, doing the same thing, moving cumbersome commodities from one place to the other via the river currents. National roads, connecting urban areas, connecting the agricultural farmlands to the cities to speed up trade and the movement of commodities. Of course, you have river transport now because we have steamboats, so we can actually chug against the current of the rivers. And so this transportation revolution is part of this much bigger industrial revolution. And what it does is bind together countries and indeed at some point continents, binding them together, linking cities to cities, linking cities to farmland, making it possible to move commodities quickly and cheaply. Of course, this also generates millions of new jobs and provides an incentive for inventions and new technological breakthroughs. Now, I mentioned that politics are going to be impacted by the Industrial Revolution. This change in the material world among human beings is going to give rise to new ways of thinking about our relationships, new ways of organizing ourselves in this capitalist jungle that we've created here. I can start by saying that the free enterprise in 19th century factories was not nearly as attractive to the workers, perhaps, as it was to the owners of the factories. The owners, of course, can live in great wealth and splendor, while the workers live in squalor without insurance, without health benefits, and things like this. So you can see that there's going to be a rising antagonism between a massive working class in these cities and then the owners, the capitalists, the people who control the mode of production, as Marx would say. I read somewhere where workers regarded free enterprise as the freedom to starve because of their low wages and the insecurity of their employment. Because of this, you have rising ideologies, socialism and communism, that are very appealing to the workers because it promises them a greater stake in the outcome of their lives. and a greater control over their working lives. These ideologies, socialism, communism, promise to reduce the exploitation of capitalism. Of course, in 1840, we have the publication of Karl Marx's famous pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto. Probably the most famous line from the manifesto, quote, "Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains." A ringing call to arms, trying to gather the urban working classes across Europe into one powerful political mass. Of course, the purpose of socialism is to organize workers into unions or political parties to pressure the capitalist for better working conditions and for better distribution of the wealth. We might as well say a few words about Marx because he's going to have a huge impact here in the 20th century. Marx, of course, was a German philosopher. He believed that he had found the key that propelled human history, and that is class conflict. In his own time, it would be the conflict between the capitalist on the one hand and the urban working class on the other, what he called the proletariat. Marx argues that there's a contradiction within capitalism that will destroy it, and that is the artificial value placed upon goods and services manifested by profit. He said that capitalism will inevitably drive weaker competition out of business, that monopolies will result, greater and greater concentrations of capital in fewer and fewer hands, so that the economy is utterly dominated by a few, exploiting the rest and creating a conflict in a most unbalanced society. Marx had devised an outline of history, again, using class conflict. He said ancient modes of production were tied to slavery. And of course, slavery, the conflict there is explicit. He said in medieval Europe that the feudal system, the feudal mode of production placed the nobility against the serfs. He said the capitalist system places the bourgeoisie or the rising middle class against the urban proletariat, the working class. Socialism, of course, aims for a classless society with the means of production, that is the factories and the machines and everything else, not in the hands of the capitalists, but in the hands of the working class. Should this come to pass, and Marx assured us that it would, the state would wither away. There'd be no need for its police powers to maintain order because there'd be no class conflict. There'd be no need for representations to stand up for this industry or that industry or agriculture or what have you, because it would all be in the hands of the working class. Marx spent his life in exile for the most part, first in France, then in England. Of course, his great theoretical work, Das Kapital, is still available in any library. And of course, it's probably his greatest impact is that Marx inspired the 20th century revolutionaries, Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and Mao Zedong and on and on and on. Of course, the great contradiction of Marxism is that Marx believed that this class conflict, which would drive history, that capitalism would inevitably transform itself into socialism as the urban working class took over the means of production, eliminated the state, eliminated the capitalist. So Marx believed that this would happen in a modern industrialized country like Germany or England or France or the United States. And of course it didn't. It happened in two large agricultural countries, Russia and China. So this is probably the great irony of Marxism, is that it takes root precisely where Marx did not believe it would be possible to take root. Let me draw a conclusion here, a brief one. The Industrial Revolution represents not only a change in man's material world, but also changes in his mental and political world to address these changes in our day-to-day relationships as we live through this Industrial Revolution. A big topic, again, we could spend a semester on it, but we have to be selective, so I'm going to stop there and I'll see you next time.